on other questions. So on his economic performance, for example, we've seen those ratings falling since he took office.
We head to the United States to find out what's happening in Washington, where Lara Spirit is our woman cartwheeling through the corridors of power. Hello, Lara.
Hi, Hugo. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being with us. Look, we've been talking today a lot about the talks in Washington between Donald Trump and Zelensky and all the other European leaders yesterday. It seems a lot was agreed, including the promise of a security guarantee from the US, even if it was a bit vague. On Tuesday, Keir Starmer is going to be chairing a coalition of the willing to meeting as to continue those discussions. That's presumably happening at the moment. Donald Trump says he's made the first steps arranging a trilateral meeting between himself, Putin and Zelensky. Is that likely to happen, do you think?
Well, that's the big question, because obviously there are some in Europe who are sceptical about the idea that Putin is doing anything but playing for time at the moment. And they would say, actually, if you look, Putin is making small but still significant gains on the battlefield. He has an obvious interest in pushing this process long, not least because it wasn't long ago there were very damaging sanctions being promised by Trump if he didn't make progress on this point. So whether or not he does agree to this meeting, I think, remains to be seen. We've heard from a policy advisor of his suggesting that it's not necessarily going to happen, that Putin himself will be among those present, but perhaps there'll be senior negotiators. But Trump seems very optimistic that this will happen. Indeed, he posted yesterday saying so, which you mentioned there. So I think for the moment, people are tentatively optimistic about it. But, this morning, President Macron of France calling Putin an ogre, who basically said that we can't believe anything that Putin says on these questions, suggests that not everybody who was at the Oval Office yesterday feels quite the same way on this question.
And look, that promise that he made of the US providing security guarantees for Ukraine, nobody seems to quite know what it means. What is it regarded as having meant in Washington?
Yes, exactly. It's a very good question. So, people are hailing progress on the very point that he's open to these security guarantees. So Mark Rutte, of course, of NATO, saying that he was excited about this prospect because it wasn't long ago, of course, that Trump seemed very opposed to this. However, even though he seems open to it now, it's important to say that he was very clear about the fact that he thought Europe would be would be shouldering the biggest burden when it comes to whatever security guarantees do come out of this process, if indeed any do. And so for that reason, I think people are not necessarily massively optimistic that the US will play a huge role. But I think Trump yesterday didn't rule out the idea that there may be boots on the ground. Clearly, he wants to keep options open on this point at the moment, but he's been, very clear in the past about the fact that he doesn't want the US to be involved in foreign wars, that he wants to end them, and I think he would hope for a situation, you would imagine, where he was able to support Europe on offering meaningful security guarantees while perhaps not providing, troops or of his own. We should say that there was mention of this £90 billion arms agreement as part of those security guarantees. So Ukraine able to buy arms from Europe via the US. So I think there will be different questions around how these are offered, but Zelensky will be wanting something firm on this as part of any agreement.
Lara, let's talk a bit about how all this and indeed everything else Donald Trump is doing is landing at home, because the Times has been looking at Trump's approval ratings since he came to office for his second term. How do those ratings suggest he's doing?
Yes, well, they suggest that his big crackdown on immigration and deportations is proving pretty popular. This is something that polls well with voters. But on other questions, so on his economic performance, for example, we've seen those ratings falling since he took office. And overall, if you look at the stage of their presidencies, Obama and Biden both held a superior favorability score over Trump. And Trump is now around level where Biden was at the very end of his 4 years in office. So you might say that's not necessarily particularly good. On how the Ukraine process will play with Trump, I think it remains to be seen. Obviously, as with other countries, it's very, very clear that voters care less about foreign affairs than they do about significant domestic issues that affect them more imminently. But it is true, if you look at research done by Pew, that roughly 7 in 10 Americans think the war between Russia and Ukraine is important to US national interest. This isn't something that people dismiss, but it's too soon to tell what that impact, if any, would be on his overall rating.
And Lara, finally, you live in a city under occupation because National Guard numbers in Washington, D.C. are being reinforced with 3 more states deploying troops to the nation's capital. What justification has Donald Trump given for this? It's such a remarkable thing. It must be the big domestic story there, almost far more important, you'd have thought, on the ground than Ukraine or anything to do with it.
It's a really big domestic story, and I got back from holiday recently and hadn't been here since the troops arrived. I mean, we should say that DC is a heavily patrolled city anyway, as you can imagine, being a massive city and one of a huge geopolitical significance. So we're not, it's not weird for us to see police on the streets, but it is noticeably much more heavily patrolled than previously. You see National Guard troops around. Yesterday I saw a cyclist putting their middle finger up at one of them. I saw protesters as well. So it feels quite tense here in DC. Trump is saying the crime, bloodshed, bedlam and squalor, it's that it's out of control, and that as a result of a number of quite high profile recent crimes in DC, particularly the carjacking of a former Doge employee, which resulted in pictures of him sort of bloodied on the floor by a car, in which Trump was horrified by, have justified an increase in this presence. But it's also an interesting kind of political gambit, because it's basically saying to the Democrats, are you going to respond to us and say, actually, crime is at a 30-year low, crime in DC has gone down, and risk minimizing voters' concerns and their experiences, many of whom will say, perhaps the statistics say that crime has gone down, but, I actually see crime every day, and therefore I feel like it's very significant, and you're minimizing my concerns. And you, as a party, have historically perhaps had a reputation for being more soft on crime than the Republicans have. So for that reason, I think Democrats find it, perhaps slightly more difficult to respond to it. And there have been some really difficult instances, not just that carjacking, but also, shooting outside the Centers for Disease Control, a Target parking space in Texas as well. There's been a lot of anxiety over the last few months about crime, and DC has a murder rate, which I read this morning, staggering, 25 times of London. So this is not an insignificant issue, but how it plays politically, I think, will be very interesting.
Yeah, I believe DC even has more deaths by stabbing than London does, and that's even before you get to all the gun deaths as well. Is there any indication that this move has cut crime in the city, whether or not it was rising or falling beforehand?
Not yet. And of course, there's a big question about whether or not these troops are being actually deployed in the places that have the highest amount of crime. So as you can imagine, crime is in DC often concentrated in very particular areas. And so I think we'll see. I mean, clearly, at the moment, there are a number of conservative states who are actually sending their own troops to DC now. So West Virginia, Mississippi, Ohio have actually offered their own DC troops to come to the capital. So this is not an issue by any stretch that is going away. And I think whether or not we see any impact on the statistics will probably take a little bit of time to see.
And look, we've seen the National Guard deployed to LA earlier in the year. Is there any suggestion that this is going to keep happening? He's going to be sending National Guard troops into a variety of cities until the crime picture across the entire country changes?
Well, you could certainly see him. You could certainly see him doing that. But it's interesting because previously, he has celebrated a drop in the nationwide murder rate before. But this has been an issue that has played well. So you'll remember that Republicans jumped on that spike in crime during the pandemic to win control of the House in 2022. Clearly, crime is an issue that they feel strongly on. Like I said before, when it comes to his opinion ratings on deportations and immigration, this is the strong area in the Trump arsenal. It's something that the White House is very, very keen to emphasize. So I think it would be surprising if they retreated from discussions of crime. I think some of it will depend on how the Democrats respond to it as well. But, for the moment, I think what he has very successfully done, whether or not he intended it, is to change a lot of the media attention in recent weeks from issues that perhaps weren't as beneficial to him. Things like, as you say, difficult economic news, perhaps, and also, of course, the ongoing fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein case, to this issue where Republicans feel very confident on.